Good evening, everyone. My name is Helen Lurie, and on behalf of the Treasure Coast, Florida chapter of the Links Incorporated, I welcome you to our program this evening. Welcome to the Smart Money Moves webinar review. If you are joining us for the first time, I want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us. You are in for a treat. And for our participants who've been participating with us along the way, I say welcome back. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to be with us this evening. Next slide. This evening, what we are going to be covering is the 3 webinars that we've covered up until this point. On the screen, there's some tips for a successful webinar. This is going to be recorded. We ask that the participants remain muted. There will be an opportunity for you to unmute yourself because this webinar is going to be an interactive one. I want to hear from you. We're really trying to figure out where our participants are, where we can assist you. And so you will have an opportunity to unmute yourself or type in the chat just to share where you are with us this evening. Next slide, please. Now, just to give you a little background about the program, which is entitled Discovering the Treasures of Home Ownership. We created this program and launched it back in November of 2020 because we had a vision and a mission for our community. The program was developed to address the needs to increase the number of African-American homeowners in Indian River, Martin, and St. Lucie County. Next slide. The Discovering the Treasures of Homeownership program also exists to increase participants' financial knowledge and awareness in a number of critical areas. And I will go into some of these areas in a few. And as we go through the webinars, you will understand where we're coming from. Next slide, please. So what we expect is that our program participants will gain an increased awareness of factors that are impacting your ability to purchase a home. As a local realtor, I realized that many people here struggle in trying to obtain a home. There's obstacles that come along the way. We've identified some of the obstacles, and we have partnered up with professionals in the community to help individuals overcome those obstacles to get to the finish line of owning a home. You will also learn how you can increase your wealth for future generation. Part of our mission is to not only create new home buyers in our community, but it's also to create generational wealth. Next slide. We want to increase the buying power in the African-American community and to empower the community to become financially savvy, leading to an increase in newly purchased home and the retention of existing homes. So as I mentioned, our mission is to increase newly purchased homes and retention of existing homes. Owning a home is a true treasure, and we wanted to make sure that people realize this along the way. We wanted people to realize that the home that you are trying to purchase is a treasure. And individuals that have existing homes, we want to just remind you of the treasure that lies within your home ownership. Next slide. So it's broken down into different segments. As you can see here on your screen, we have a section that is targeting first-time home buyers. And the objective is to talk about the benefits of home ownership, the home buying process. And we also want to speak to our existing homeowners, talk about the power of home ownership, heirs property and estates planning. Again, those that have been with us along the journey since we started in November, you have some insight on what we've covered thus far. Next slide, please. Now, why did we tackle this? There's a slide up on your screen, and hopefully everybody can see this slide. Prior to launching this program, what we did was we took a look on a national scale of what home ownership looked like in the Black community and Black home ownership, not just the Black community, but Black home ownership. And the numbers were alarming. They were alarming to say the least, because the numbers were so low. And then we scaled it back and looked at the local level, and we looked at the Treasure Coast. And as you can see here on the screen, this is the data that we were able to capture. And this data is from the census population of 2019 and suburban stats of 2019. If you follow along with me, you'll see that in Indian River County, the population is a little less than 160,000 people. And when we look at the total Black owner occupied homes, we only have 2,000, a little over 2,000. Then we looked at St. Lucie County. You see the population there, a little less than 330,000 people. And when we looked at the numbers in terms of Black owner occupied homes, the numbers was 9,636. And then lastly, Martin County, you can see the population is not too far from Indian River's population. And then when we looked at the Black owner occupied homes, we only saw numbers of a little over 1,000. So that was our call to action. We needed to do what we needed to do to try to increase the Black home ownership within our county, which is why we launched this program, Discovering the Treasures of Homeownership. Next slide. So part of our webinar series, the first series was entitled Smart Money Moves, which we're going to cover today. And the 3 webinars that we had was Budgeting During a Crisis, Take Control of Your Credit, and Investing in Yourself and Business Ownership. What we discovered was that in 2020, with this pandemic, from 2020 into 2021, many people decided that they were going to level up. People were either out of work because of the pandemic or have chosen to just do things differently. So we have that piece that you will hear about a little bit later. Next slide, please. The next upcoming webinars, as you see on your screen here, will deal with wills, trust, and estate planning, establishing Homestead, avoiding heirs property, and leaving a legacy. Now, this is where we're talking about how to leave a legacy, how to create generational wealth, how to ensure that the properties and the homes that we're working so hard for, that we don't lose them. And so we have, like I said, partnered up with some attorneys, other professionals in this field that's going to cover these webinars in the month of March and in the month of April. Next slide, please. On your screen, you should see that we have upcoming webinars that's happening, and they're listed there. The Establishing the Homestead, Avoiding Heirs Property, and Leaving a Legacy, as I mentioned. And we hope that you can join us for those programs. They're not programs that you would want to miss. At this point, I want to draw your attention to the different professionals that we have partnered up with. Truist Bank is a huge partner with us. Local realtors, attorneys, insurance agents, credit counselors, and our property appraiser. So at this time, we can move on to the next slide. At this time, I want to just open up the floor to see if anybody has any questions at the moment before we move on to our first webinar. And feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions, or type in the chat. Okay, it's kind of quiet. We have a quiet group this evening. Like I mentioned, I want this to be interactive, so please feel free to type into the chat. The next thing that I'm going to cover is the webinar that was presented by Truist Bank, and our presenter was Dawn Bloomfield. And the title of that webinar was Budgeting During a Crisis. Why did we decide to start with budgeting during a crisis? Well, obviously, we're in a crisis, right? So many of you are probably familiar with just budgeting, have heard the term before, have attempted to do it. I know I've attempted myself, but budgeting during a crisis was something that looked totally different. And when this was presented back in November, Kathy Hendricks, branch leader of BB&T, which is now Truist, and Dawn Bloomfield, they did a phenomenal job covering this. And this evening, my goal is to just review, connect with you all, and then figure out how I can be of assistance to connect some dots. Next slide, please. Now, what is budgeting during a crisis, and what does that look like? Right. So there's always been a need for planning and budgeting, right? Just overall. But when it came to budgeting in the midst of a crisis, that changed things a little bit. Because as you can imagine, and I'm sure you know, and we're going to talk about it as we go through the slides, we have needs and we have wants, right? And sometimes our wants, we want our wants to be needs, but when we have to scale back and we look at the grand scheme of things, we realize they fall into two different categories. And in the midst of this crisis, we really, many of us really had to identify the things that we needed to cut out because it just didn't fit with our new norm. So budgeting in and out of a crisis allows you to have a clear understanding of your financial picture. The clear understanding enables you to make informed decisions about money and prioritize your spending and your saving, right? So many of us, like I mentioned, unfortunately, became unemployed during this crisis, during this pandemic that we were in, and had to figure some things out. And some of us were lucky enough to never miss a paycheck, but didn't know what the future was holding for us. So we started to plan and we started to budget. And if you haven't, here's an opportunity to get some ideas of how you can budget during this crisis. Okay, next slide, please. So creating a crisis budget. So when I say creating a crisis budget, what you need to do is identify your expenses and your income. I think sometimes when people think about their income, they often leave out what income is, where the income is coming from. And we're going to talk about some creative ways where you can get some income to increase the income that you already have. So budgeting when your income has stopped or in jeopardy is different than regular budgeting, which I've already mentioned. Instead of starting with your income and budgeting every dollar, determine the minimum needed to survive, and then do all you can to find enough monthly income to cover those necessities. So in the next few slides, we'll talk about how we can find the extra money that we need to cover those necessities. So our expenses, money going out, and then our income, money coming in. Okay, next slide, please. First step, identify your expenses. What is money going out? What does that look like? And I think that sometimes when we're thinking about expenses that are going out, we may forget some things and we're going to talk about those in the next few slides. So here are the fixed must-haves, right? Housing, which would include your rent, your mortgage, health insurance, life insurance, car insurance. These are the things that are just fixed. There's a fixed amount associated with them. We know on a monthly or weekly basis how much, or annually, how much we're paying for these items. And then they're a fixed number, so we can't really play around with those numbers because we know it is what it is. Okay, next slide, please. And then we have what we call variable must-haves. And with the variable must-haves expenses, the expenses you cannot do without, but they have a different amount each month. So when you think about it, you think about your electricity, your natural gas, your basic phone plan. So these are the variables that are must-haves. However, the price, what we pay for them can increase or decrease. So I'm going to pause right now, and I'm going to ask, just looking at these must-have expenses that are variable because the cost increases or decreases. Any ideas with what we have on the screen? Any way that we can cut costs with any of these variables? Please unmute yourself and join me. I'll start. Electricity. Every time my kid walks out of a room, I say, turn off the lights. I'm constantly going after them, turning off lights, in hopes that last month's bill is not as high as, this month's bill is not as high as last month's bill. Anyone else want to give an example?
With groceries.
Okay, yes.
Well, when I say groceries, knowing where to shop, how to shop, whether you need bulk or not, as well as plan maybe for um, eating in, cooking, as opposed to eating out. So you can have variables. You have to eat, but you have variable on how much you spend on groceries.
Absolutely. You make such a great point, especially with buying bulk, right? Just being mindful of the things that we're buying bulk. I find sometimes we buy bulk and before we can get through it, it goes bad. But yes, that's a great point. Identifying where you can get a deal, what supermarket, if there's any coupons, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Anyone else?
Necessary clothes is a really, most of the clothes we have are really not necessary because we don't wear half the things in our closet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree, especially now, right? Many of us are working from home. We're only being seen from the head down to the waist. So we don't need much in terms of going out and shopping like we used to. So that is excellent. One last one, if anybody cares to share. So I just want to add, we have prizes. We have prizes today. Hopefully I'll get more participation. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so now let's take a look at this chart. I talked about debt and sanity, right? So debt is money borrowed by one party from another. So our auto loans, student loans, credit card loans, these things come monthly. We owe someone, we have to pay that debt down. But then there's the sanity expenses, and this is where I want to spend some time, because sanity expenses are small expenses that help give relief and or enjoyment. Examples: entertainment, treats, gift. And we have these sanity expenses. Some of us have scaled back from these sanity expenses since our pandemic. So one of them, some have scaled back, and some of us have added to them, like video streaming services. Many of us watched a whole lot of Netflix this during this pandemic, right? So that video streaming service provided some sanity for us. But one way to probably cut cost is to probably not have 2 or 3 streaming services. I know people that have Netflix and Hulu and on and on and on, all these different services, maybe scaling back and just keeping one streaming services versus the 3 or 4 that we have. Would anybody care to share a sanity expense, sanity expense that we have created, that you have, that you just think is part of your monthly expenses that you can't let go of right now? Quiet.
Well, I won't say it can't let go of. I'm sorry if I interrupted someone. But sometimes you sign up for these things and really forget you have them.
Mm, that's
Uh, for the longest, I had Netflix and didn't use it.
Oh, wow.
Mom had to have a granddaughter to move in to know that I had Netflix. You know,
Okay.
and those type things. So you think you need it for sanity, and some things are you've just signed up. I used to have Roku,
Right.
but I eventually made sure I got rid of not paying for that. But
Right.
yeah, so sometimes you have what you think are sanity type expenses, and you just have too many of them. And because they're sort of like hidden
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, they hit your account, and it's such a small amount that you don't really pay attention to it. But all small amounts build up.
You're absolutely right. Um, you're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. And I think what happens oftentimes, they come out automatically. So you're not necessarily writing a check for them. And so it's so easy to forget those. So taking the opportunity to kind of like look through maybe your bank account statements and see what these little expenses are, and identifying whether or not you really need it at this moment. Once you figure out, wow, add up how much you've been spending on a monthly basis, it may cause you to say, wait a minute, do I really need it? One of the things that I'm going to talk about a little bit later is sometimes, if you're anything like myself, I will sign up for these free 7-day trial things. Oh, I love those. And I always say, okay, at the seventh day, I'm going to get rid of it. Never fails. I never get rid of it. So 2 months later, once I'm seeing these charges on my account, that's when I recall that. So we're going to talk about those little subscriptions that we want to go back and look and see, do we really need these subscriptions, and probably get away from it. So there was a question in the chat of whether or not, or how many people have started a budget since this webinar in November. Does anybody care to share whether or not you started a budget? No one? Okay. All right. So feel free to jump in. I'm going to go to the next slide. All right, so this slide talks about total expenses, right? So you would look at your total must-have fixed expenses and your must-have variable expenses, your total debt payments, and your total sanity expenses, and then figure out that calculation, whether you're paying them weekly, monthly, or annually, and that will give you a total, your total expense, money coming out of your household. Next slide, please. So cutting costs, how can we lower our expenses? I mentioned this earlier. One, we need to identify our needs from our wants. And like I said, sometimes we feel like our wants are our needs, but in reality, they're not, they're different, right? So with the needs, trimming necessary ones, maybe scaling back on a phone plan, grocery expenses, as Ms. Alma Miller mentioned earlier, looking for coupons to save extra money on necessities. One of the things that I wanted to add here, because we're talking about the treasures of home ownership and creating a budget and creating it during this crisis, one of the things I know many people have done is that people are refinancing their mortgages now. They have identified there's ways to save money. The rates are super low now. As a realtor, I can tell you the rates are super low now, and people are taking advantage of that and refinancing their loans, getting a lower interest rate, getting lower payments, and that has helped them cut some costs. Has anybody on our panel, anybody in the group right now, has anybody taken advantage of refinancing your mortgage? Is anybody thinking about refinancing your mortgage? Okay, well,
Really,
if you
the
haven't
only
yet.
one talking, Miss Lori. But to be honest with you, you get a lot of requests in the mail and that sort of thing from your lender regarding refinancing. And to be honest with you, not that I cannot long for a cheaper rate. I would love to have a cheaper rate, but there's some things that I enjoy with the current lender based upon the current mortgage that I have that I don't want to lose.
Okay.
So sometimes I don't know if refinancing is the best way to go.
So you make a good point. So there's definitely that, you have there are people that are benefiting from their lender in different ways, but I urge people to do their research before doing that. But I know that is something that many people have taken advantage of during this time. So going to the wants, cutting unnecessary spending. Now, what does that look like? Give me an example of an unnecessary spending, please. Unnecessary spending.
My nails.
Oh, yes. So again, not a need, but a want. But some would argue that it is a need.
Oh,
But
yes.
yes, people have identified. I'll tell you what I've done. With instead of going to the nail salon and paying for gel nail polishes that costs a pretty price. I just bought a kit online and I just do it at home. So that allows me to save some money. So it allows me to cut some unnecessary spending there. So take inventory of automatic payments. Even consider stopping automatic payments so that you can manage every dollar. Now, that's a recommendation. Oftentimes with the automatic payments, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes we're not even aware of what's coming out, when it's coming out, how much is coming out. Even when things increase because they are on automatic payments, we don't even realize that there's an increase. So making sure that we are watching this along the way. Track and log all your automatic subscriptions, which I was talking about, those 7-day plans that we missed out on, and now we're being charged $19.99 a month. Go back and take a look at them and identify if you in fact really need those subscriptions. Next slide, please. So cutting costs, how can you lower your expenses? You can lower your cell phone plan, to the most basic or least expensive plan. Get a less expensive car, or if you have 2 cars, you can get rid of 1 car. That's something. Decrease your utilities to the most basic. There was a time, I think, before our pandemic when we weren't so dependent on our internet service. I would say, yeah, go down to the basic internet service. I don't think that that's the best advice at the moment, but there may be other things that you can identify that you could cut. Speak to your landlord or mortgage provider to see what payment reliefs are available. There are deferments that are available for people that need them. I urge that if you need it, take it. There are people that were taking advantage of deferments that really did not need them. Just know that the payments don't go away. They're tacked onto the back end of your mortgage, and you may have to pay some penalties, but you'll have to make payments at some point. And then lowering your grocery bill. I want to stay on this for just a second. Lowering your grocery bill by buying healthy yet less expensive food, and move to drinking water. One of the things that I had to do in my household, we used to buy water bottles, and I'm sure some of you can attest to this. I would walk around the house and there was 20 bottles that someone just took a sip of and just put it on the counter, and nobody can identify whose bottle it is, and they don't want to drink from the bottle anymore because they don't know who it is. So in order to cut that expense, I just purchased a water dispenser. We buy the big 5-gallon jug waters bottles, and that helps with these little water bottles that we had all over the home. So just really taking a look and combing through what is your money going to, and figuring out how we can cut those expenses. Next slide, please. And here you can look at the list of things that you can cut costs. We've talked about many of them. Dates and outings. I think those are sanity expenses that you need sometimes to go out on dates and go out on outings, but maybe not 5 times a week, right? A retirement contributions. I want to talk about that. Many of the companies that we work for will match a 401k contribution. You have the liberty to increase or decrease those contributions. I would just say at the very least, if they're matching a certain percentage, that you put in as, you match the percentage that they're matching. But here's a chart here of some things that can give you some ideas of things that we can cut. Yes, ma'am.
I think another thing, I don't see it on your list, I thought you were probably going to cut, is your credit cards. People don't need as many credit cards as they have. And if you have a credit card, kind of eliminate it down to maybe 1, 2 at most, and then pay those off at the end of each month.
Right. Thank you so much, Ms. Ruth, for saying that. Tanya Lowe, who's also presenting this evening, she's going to be talking about credit. So I didn't want to steal her shine there. Let's see. Okay, so deferred payments. I mentioned that earlier. Some lenders offer borrowers deferred payments. This means that you may not be required to make monthly payment. Again, I caution you, use it if you need it. A lot of people are taking deferments that don't really need it, and but use it if you need it. It's there. Your borrowers understand that we are in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of a crisis, and they will extend these deferred payments to you. But just be mindful of that. So what you could do is you can make a list of lenders that you can and borrowers that you can actually reach out to that would provide a deferment of your payments. Everybody will not, but some will. Make a note of it, who it is, what the company, how much, and then when you would actually have to resume payments for that actual debt. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we go into identifying your income, I want to take a moment again, brief moment. Does anybody want to share any best practices, things that they have used? Just one, just looking for one of something that you did to cut costs during this period. Coupons. Okay, thank you. So we got coupons. Yes, coupons. I love coupons. Oh, who doesn't love coupons? I always feel like, why should I pay full price? I always ask for coupons. My children are often embarrassed by me because I'm always asking, do you have a coupon? Because sometimes they have coupons, and if you don't ask, they won't give you the coupons. Okay, so now identifying your income. Now we have to really figure out what is income, what money is coming into your home. So your income may come from full-time work, part-time work, or other, and we're going to talk about the others in a little while. The whole idea, like we talked about, discovering the treasures of home ownership, is what we really want people to do is to create generational wealth. And so we have to figure out how we can get more income, how we can save, how we can cut costs to achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. Okay, creative income. Even though you've hit a rough patch, there is work to be found, and now it's time to hustle. So what we have done, some people have been doing Uber Eats, Lyft, just to try to find different creative avenues to make money. Companies such as Amazon, UPS are hiring. So there are opportunities out there to make some additional income. During this pandemic, people decided to start making masks and selling them, started grocery shopping for their neighbors. Some of our population that wasn't comfortable with going out. So there's still those opportunities out there to get this creative income. And online storefronts. Thank you, Mr. Lurie. All right, next slide, please. So here are some ideas for creative income: childcare, delivery services, like I mentioned, some cleaning services, shopping for individuals, and virtual tutoring. If you have children, if you're children, oftentimes your school will have a group on social media like Facebook. There's Facebook pages for my children's school, and I see quite often where people are asking for tutors, and they're looking for these virtual tutors for the kids. So if you know that you're great at math or great at science and you'd be willing to do that, that's an opportunity for you to bring some more income into your household. Next slide, please. Selling possessions. Selling a car, selling electronics, things that we're not using. I mean, if you have children or don't have children, I'm just looking for stuff around the house that you don't use. With me, I have twin boys. They outgrow everything very quickly. So we always have items to sell. And the great thing about kids' clothes, they outgrow them so quickly that they don't really even have much wear and tear on them, so we are able to sell those possessions. So just identifying things that you can sell to bring some extra income into the home. Next slide, please. Bartering. Bartering is so great. Cash isn't your only currency. Identify the skills that you have, maybe a skill that somebody else has, and then swap services. That's always a great way also. Next slide. So like I mentioned, cash isn't your only currency. If you're great with kids, maybe you can babysit for someone. If you're a great cook, if you like to sew, if you know how to sew, if you're skilled at handyman, yard work, plumbing, those types of things, there is work out there. There is a way that you can make some additional income. Next slide, please. Charity tax write-off. Okay, and the third step, and our last step that we're going to talk about, is identifying your budget. Determine if you're living within your means. And what does that mean? So we have to take a look at our total expenses and our total income and identify if there's a deficit or a surplus, right? A deficit is when the sum of expenses is greater than your income. If you're spending more money than you bring in, then you have a deficit, right? And this is where you tap into, okay, how do I get some creative income? And then in terms of having a surplus, you have a surplus if the amount of money left over when expenses have been paid. So if you have money left over, everything has been paid. All your subscriptions that you can't let go of, all your needs and all your wants, everything has been paid and you have some money, then you have a surplus. Next slide, please. Okay. I leave you with this. I read somewhere someone said, we're all in the same boat, and somebody came back and said, no, we're not in the same boat. We're all in the same storm. Some of us are in yachts, some of us are in paddle boats, some of us are drowning. And all I can say to you is this: no storm can last forever. We'll get through this together. Our goal, like I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, is to increase home ownership within our community, is to give people the tools that they need in order to get to that finish line. And it's also to create generational wealth. At this time, before I bring on Ms. Tanya Lowe, just want to see if anybody has any questions or anything that you would like to share before we move on. Ms. Alma Miller, you have been such a great participant, and I thank you for that. And anybody else, like I said, if you think of something after we get off, after I come off and you want to type it in the chat, I will be monitoring the chat, and then I will be more than happy to answer your question. But at this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Mrs. Tanya Lowe.
Thank you, Helen, and good evening, everyone. As Helen mentioned, we'd like for this to be a very interactive session where you provide us with some of your input about how our webinar series has benefited you, what you've learned from it, what actions you've taken to move forward using the information that we've shared with you. And in doing so, we're going to move right on to the next webinar that was presented entitled Taking Control of Your Credit. That series or that webinar was presented by Mr. Gene Broom of Credit Confidant LLC. Gene is a credit advisor, and he is the author of Insider Reveals Secrets to Improve Your Credit. Next slide. And our next slide. With Mr. Broom, what we learned in that webinar is that cash used to be king, and now credit is king. Did you know that everyone is ordering either a soft hit on your credit or a hard hit on your credit? But everything that has to do with your financial life is built around your credit. So you want to make certain that you know what your credit says about you. So let's first take a look at who orders your credit report. First and foremost, Employers who do background checks, they're ordering your credit report to see if you are a viable candidate for whatever position. Sorry about that, looks like I was muted. Employers are ordering your credit report, and this includes the military. As we learned from Gene Broom, there are some people who have tried to enter the military who were denied based on their credit. So it is important that we know what's in our credit file, and it's important that we stay on top of what's in our credit file. In addition to that, did you know that your insurance premium is also partially based on your credit? How many people knew that? If you will, just in the chat, if you'll type yes or no, that you knew that your insurance premiums are based partly on a soft hit on your credit report. Very good. So quite a few people were aware that yes, that is a part of why your premium may be different from your next door neighbor who may have the same exact vehicle with the same exact coverages. In addition to that, lenders. Now we know that lenders are always checking for credit, whether you're trying to get a loan. In addition to that, if you're trying to open a checking account or a savings account, all lenders will check your credit. When you're looking to either rent a home or an apartment, if you're looking to rent a car even, when you're looking to start or move utilities, that includes your cable, everyone is checking your credit. So now let me ask you, I want to take a moment. Since our webinar, how many people have ordered their credit report? If you've ordered your credit report, just type yes in the chat. Okay. Looks like we have a few people who have ordered their credit report. If for those who have ordered your credit report, were you surprised by what was in your credit file? And if so, is there anyone who would like to share what was a surprise in their credit report? Okay, so it looks like most people are saying no surprises. A couple of people said yes, there were some surprises in their credit report. The reason why it's so important for you to check your credit report is because about 75% of all credit reports contain errors and old information. And you won't know that until you check your credit report. When you check your credit report and you discover that there is incorrect information, it is imperative that you reach out to not just one credit bureau. Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion are the 3 credit bureaus that you want to reach out to make certain that that incorrect information is taken off all 3 of your credit reports. It's also important to make certain that you challenge this information in writing versus challenging the information online, okay? In the chat, how many days does the creditor have to respond to your challenge about information in your credit report? And I believe Helen said we have prizes. Let's see. I see 60 days, I see 30 days, I see 90 days. Well, it looks like Regina Woods is correct. According to Gene Broom, it's 30 days. They have 30 days to respond to your challenge about what's in your credit report. And if they do not respond, it has to be removed from your credit report. Okay. Well, we don't have do we have our next slide? Okay. Another key piece of information that we learned from Mr. Gene Broom is understanding our credit. How is our credit score calculated? Now, one of the things that we also learned is that there are several different credit scores. So if you're using Credit Karma, for instance, you may have a different credit score than Equifax or a different credit score than Experian. So all of the credit scores can be different. But these three, this is how your credit is broken down. First and foremost, 35% of your credit score is based on your payment history. So basically, do you pay your bills on time? That is so important, to pay your bills on time. That 31st day is detrimental to anyone, especially if it is an installment account. 30% is based on credit utilization. How much of your credit do you use? What we learned from Mr. Broom is that we can easily reduce or increase our credit score, and we can do it quickly by looking at how we're utilizing our credit. So for instance, if you utilize your credit less than 30%, you have a higher credit score. So let's say you have a credit card and your limit is $5,000. 30% of that is $1,500. So if you have a credit card, your limit is $5,000. If what you owe is more than $1,500, as soon as when you pay off down below, pay off your credit card to 30% or less, that can immediately impact your score, your credit score, positively. And then again, keep in mind, what I do appreciate about the credit industry is that our credit is updated more rapidly than it used to be. Whenever you make purchases, whenever you make payments, your credit score is immediately impacted. If you have, how many of us, let me go to another question. How many of you in the chat, some of you have ordered your credit reports. How many of you have signed up for a monthly credit reporting agency that lets you know everything that's going on with your credit? You'll get an email or a text if someone inquired about your credit, if your credit limit increased, if your credit limit decreased, if your credit score changes. How many of you have signed up for those? Very good. We have several people who have a credit monitoring system in place. Very good. Looks like quite a few people. Excellent, excellent. That helps you stay on top of your credit score and your credit file overall. 15% of your credit score is based on your credit history or the length of credit history. So what this means to you is you never want to close an account like an old account, because the older your accounts, the better. What it looks like is, how have you been building your credit over a long period of time? Or did you just start building your credit? So you want to make certain, again, that those old accounts, let's say if you have an old credit card and you don't use it, you still want to, as Jean reminded us, you buy gas, put something on that credit card, about $25, and then pay it off. That helps to keep that credit card current, and it prevents the creditor from closing the account, because there are some creditors who will close your account if you're not using it. Okay. 10% of your credit score is based on your credit mix. So that's the mix of installment accounts and revolving accounts. And then 10% is based on credit inquiries. So we know how we go shopping and we're making that purchase, and then they hit you with, are you using your Macy's card today? If you sign up for a Macy's card, you save another 20%. We have to make certain that we are careful not to buy into that 20% savings just to, taking out that credit application just to get that 20% savings, because that is going to impact your credit score. Okay. All right, so we have a question. A particular card provides it as a service. Oh, for the monthly recurring, is that what we're talking about, Alma? You can unmute, please.
Yes, I had answered it earlier, but I think I sent it on to one person. So okay. I was putting it in for everyone. Yeah, I have a particular credit card that provides the monitoring as a service.
Oh, that is fantastic.
Free.
Free. That is fantastic that your credit card company is offering free credit monitoring on a monthly basis, because that's a huge program for anyone who is really paying attention to their credit. And there is one tip at the bottom of the screen. It says, try to make at least the minimum payments on time to avoid damaging your credit. And what we learned in the webinar is that it's even better if you can pay off that debt at the end of every month. That in turn will definitely increase your credit score and open up your world of finance even wider than it is now. Next slide. I should have asked the question, what's a good credit score? So another thing we learned in our Taking Control of Your Credit webinar is that there are so many different scores and scoring companies out there. We have FICO scores and we have Vantage scores, and FICO score was created by the Fair Isaac Corporation, and it is used by 90% of top lenders, and it is the most widely known credit score in the industry. Now, the Vantage score is another branded credit score it's gaining momentum. And it was actually created by Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Now, just take a moment and look at the difference in the scoring. Now, they both have the highest score of 850. But you'll notice that you have, under the Vantage score, you have a very poor score. On the FICO, you only have a poor. But it's only about a 30-point difference on the high end of that poor score, that 579 versus 549. Yet their high score, 850, is exactly the same. So again, as you are paying off your debt and incurring debt, your score can fluctuate in both of these ranges. And keep in mind, these are two different scoring companies. Your score, your FICO score, is more than likely going to be different from your Vantage score. Now, for those who have not ordered your credit report just yet, as you can see on the screen, you can get a free credit report from all three credit bureaus by going to annualcreditreport.com. There's also creditkarma.com, wallethub.com. There are a lot of different places where you can order your credit report, but the annualfreecreditreport.com, we know for certain it is free. And keep in mind, when you order your credit report, you may not get the credit score. You may have to order the credit score separately, but you do want to know both. And just keep in mind that your credit score will fluctuate as you utilize your credit. So I want to take a moment to ask another question. For someone who has ordered their credit report and you had a surprise, would you like to share the surprise that you saw in your credit report? Did you take that time to get that resolved? Or what was that surprise? Well, I will share with you a surprise that I saw on my credit report. I saw a late student loan payment, and it was for a parent loan from one of the Parent Plus loans. And I was immediately alarmed because student loan payments are deferred by the federal government. And so I called my loan servicer, and they said, no, your loan is deferred. There should not be any late payments whatsoever. But sure enough, for whatever reason, because it is deferred, and this is something that I've been telling all of my customers as I talk to them, make certain you check your credit report And if you have student loans, make certain that you check your student loans, because even though they are deferred, they're still showing as delinquent when they on your credit report when they shouldn't be. And it was only on one credit report. It was only on Equifax. So TransUnion and Experian showed it as current, but Equifax showed it as delinquent. So basically what Equifax was reading is that they had not received information from the lender. So it looks like there was no payment versus it's deferred. Whereas TransUnion and Experian, they just read it as it was paid. So those are the types of little details that you'll learn as you're ordering your credit reports, you're comparing the 3 credit reports, because all 3 credit reports will have different information. One of the things that we also learned in our webinar with Jean is when you are taking out loans, is you can ask them, do they report to all 3 credit bureaus? Because you want that credit on all 3 credit bureaus. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. To sum up the webinar on how to take control of your credit, number 1, pay your bills on time. Try to pay your bills in full. Utilize less than 30% of your credit. Do not close your old accounts. And make certain that you order your credit report annually and/or set up a monthly credit monitoring report so that you stay in front of what's happening on your credit. You'll get, again, those notices when your balance increases or decreases, if your credit score goes up, if it goes down, if someone has inquired about your credit, even if you change your address or any type of information, you'll get that information, you'll get a notification from your credit monitoring service to let you know that there's something going on with your credit. In addition to that, there's one service that lets you know if your email address is on the dark web, which I thought was interesting. So you want to make certain that you have, a really sophisticated system that lets you know what's happening with all of your information, all of your non-public private information. Do we have any questions about this review of taking control of our credit? So if you will, in the chat, one last question. Do you feel like you are in control of your credit? Yes, I see some yes and no. So Alma, if you will, I know you've been participating a lot tonight, but you say yes and no, because that is a really good answer. Tell us about the yes and the no.
The yes is that I'm aware of my income and my obligations, and they are all under control. I bring in enough to pay out all the wants and needs. Where I say yes and no is some of those obligations are credit cards. And right now, my husband and I, we're in the process of trying to eliminate some of the credit card debt, because that's where a lot of your money goes on the interest that you pay on them and all of that. Now, I will say I was thankful for having credit when I needed it, but it quickly got out of hand when you tend to be the matriarch, or you tend to be the one in the family to help take care of things, and you just, it gets out of hand. So I'm in the process of ringing that in, so to speak.
That's
So
very
that's
good.
why I say yes and no.
Absolutely, and you're right. You hit the nail on the head, and I think that's something that we all really have experienced, where like you said, you're the matriarch of the family, and you see a lot of things that need to be done. So it's good that you're paying attention to what's taking place though with your credit, and you are on top of it, versus allowing it to spiral out of control. So very good on that. I do have a note in the chat where it says, Dr. Elizabeth said she received an alert her cell phone was on the dark web. Are you willing to share some information with us about that?
Yes, I have a service with Equifax and Experian, and I received an alert that my cell number was on the dark web, and as well as an email. So I immediately went in. Well, I haven't changed my cell phone number, but I immediately went in to change my email address, to change the password. And of course, all of my credit files are locked.
Okay, very good, very good. Now, did they by chance tell you what your cell phone number was linked to on the dark web, like an application that you may have downloaded?
No, they did not tell me where it was found. It was just visible on the dark web.
Oh, wow.
And so what is the dark web?
Well, it's basically where it's really encrypted. And there are some very brilliant people who really live on the dark web. Most are, from what I've seen, are antisocial, and all they do is they spend a lot of time on the computer, and they're really very bright people. But they do, many of them do play a lot of games on the dark web. Some are parts of dark web social groups, some groups that we may have seen early January. And some are heavily into just playing games, and some are into hacking and getting into other people's information. So I'm really glad to see that you do have a service that does provide you with a monitor or a notice that lets you know when your information is on the dark web. So anyone could have, you know, tried to use your phone number and your cell phone, your cell phone number and your email account to try to hack into your email.
Right. And another alert that I received that that several I forgot that quick. I forgot.
Senior moment, Pastor.
No, that's a 16-year-old moment, not a senior moment. But it was another alert that I received. If I think about it, I'll put it in the chat box.
Okay.
Oh, I know what it was. I received an alert that some of my passwords, that I had too many passwords, the same password with too many accounts, and that I should change them, and so I did.
Oh, okay. Okay. That was very good information as well, to make certain that you're changing those passwords and that they're different for different functions. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Well, that was the review for taking control of your credit. If we don't have any more questions, I'm hoping that everyone will take away from that review the importance of making certain that you order your credit report and or sign up for a credit monitoring service to protect yourself, and to make certain that you set a goal to continuously increase your credit score or keep that high credit score by making certain that you're vigilant about paying on time, paying in full, and using 30% or less of your credit limit. Okay. Now I'm going to transition to our third webinar that we presented, and it was called Level Up and Turn Your Talent into a Business. Level Up for 2021. Next slide, please. Level Up 2021 was presented to us by Dawn Bloomfield, branch leader of BB&T, which is now Truist Bank, and Kathy Hendricks, who's a branch leader at Truist as well. Next slide. What we covered in this course, we talked about starting a business, growing a business, and really taking your talents, what you like to do, your hobbies, and turning that into a business and actually how to do it. We talked about the different finances, the cash flow, the different merchant services you can use, the borrowing solutions that's available, as well as insurance and employees. Next slide. The objectives for the webinar that we covered, including making certain that you separate as you start a business, making certain that you separate your personal finances from your business finances. That is huge, as well as effectively managing your cash flow and keeping your business up to date with the right technology. And as we have learned in 2020, or learned from 2020, a lot of businesses who were bricks and mortar are now 100% virtual and may never go back to bricks and mortar. So a lot of businesses have transitioned nicely to technology. We also talked about knowing your credit options when the need arises, as well as having the right insurance to protect you from the unexpected, and hiring the right employees for your business. Next slide. So for those of you who were with us during the Level Up 2021 webinar, let's just kind of put your memory to the test. How many of you remember how to keep your business, your personal and business accounts separate? You can use the chat or you can come off mute.
Separate accounts for each.
Separate accounts for each. You definitely do not want to mix your business account with your personal account because you have two separate types of accounting methods that need to take place, as well as tax reporting. And let's see what we have in the chat. We have the business account and you have a personal account. Absolutely. Next slide. In opening a business account, we talked about the different pieces of information that is crucial for you to open your business account and to make certain that you keep it separate from your personal account. Now, one of the key factors that's different between a business account and a personal account that you need is what? Does anyone remember? So it's not a good time for pop quizzes after dinner, right? So for the business owner, we need a social security number, of course, your date of birth, your full personal address and ID, and your individual percentage of ownership. And for the business itself, we need the employee identification number, the federal tax ID, the business incorporation details and issue date, the business address, and the current bank information. Next slide, thank you. We also talked about the business cash flow foundations. And we talked about the foundations that will help your business simplify and manage its cash flow. In every business, you're going to collect money and you're also going to make payments. In addition to that, you're going to manage, you need to manage, invest, and protect your money. So with collecting money, we talked about who are your customers and how do they pay? So what are some of the ways that your customers will pay you in your business? And I believe Helen has some prizes.
I do.
That would be cash or credit card or a check sometimes, or
Cash.
through debit cards.
Absolutely. Cash. Cash is king next to credit. Cash, credit cards, checks, electronic checks, Some banks, some businesses also take what else? That's virtual.
It's PayPal, or I don't know what the other ones are, but PayPal is one that comes to mind.
Absolutely. PayPal, Zelle. Yes, those are the different ways that businesses collect money. Apple Pay, very good. A lot of people are now taking Apple Pay. Cash App. Some businesses, depending on the structure, are also accepting Cash App. Very good. Vimo, excellent. Thank you for your participation. We also talked about making payments. How do you pay your bills and your employees? So we talked about different systems and vendors that businesses can use to make payments, to pay their bills and their employees. And who remembers what those were? Most businesses use payroll services like Sure Payroll, ADP. They also use, to pay bills, they use QuickBooks. They could use bill pay online with their banks. So quite a few ways that businesses can make payments to pay their bills and pay their employees. And one more very important thing in owning a business, whether large or small, is how does the business manage money day to day? What are some of the tools they can use to manage money day to day? Paychecks. In managing day to day, some people use a billing service. They use Quicken, they use QuickBooks. Quite a few tools that's out there for businesses to manage that money day by day. Next slide. Okay, and here are our answers. In collecting money, how do we get paid? Once again, when we saw this in the chat, we have cash, we have checks, we have financial centers. We use mobile deposits in collecting money. Debit and credit cards, merchant services, wires, ACH, that's electronic. And then we have in making payments, checks and debit cards, credit cards, transfers, bill pay, wires, and ACH services as well. And in managing the money, definitely using a primary account for payroll, savings, and other personal accounts. Next slide, please. Now, before we go into optimizing our cash flow, one of the main questions I want to ask this evening, if you will, use the chat. How many of you have actually had an opportunity to think through your hobbies, those things that you like to do that you can turn into a business? What is that idea or thought or new business that you have started? Not everyone speak at once. And before we move on to this slide, I want to share some ideas. And Helen mentioned it earlier when we talked about finding that extra cash flow. What are those things that you like to do? Do you like to sew? A lot of people who are good at sewing have started creating masks. And now they're creating masks and scarves to match. They're creating the masks to match the shirt that they're wearing. A lot of people who like to cook are now preparing meals for those who don't like to cook. A lot of people like to bake, and they've turned their baking skills into a business. One of the things I would like to share is my youngest son started a t-shirt business. He first started creating t-shirts on his computer and selling them online. So he doesn't have to worry about inventory. He sells everything online. And he just created that in one day. So there are so many things that we can do that we can turn into a business. If you like to write, whether it's poetry, whether it's journaling, whether it's recipes, whether it's how to do, there's so many things that you can do that you're doing now that you can literally turn into a business. I also wrote down some people, how many of us like to shop? Some of us like to shop, whether it's online or in person. And there are other people who don't like to shop or who don't want to go shopping. You can become a personal shopper for those people. Some of you may like to drive. Now there's an opportunity to become an Uber driver, a Lyft driver, if you don't mind having company in your car. So again, there's so many things that we can do that we can turn into a business. Another thing, how many of you like to solve problems? And you like to help people figure out their different situations and help them get to the next level. You like to develop people. That's an opportunity for you to become a consultant. So there are so many skills and talents that we have within ourselves that we can actually utilize and transition into a business. And with that said, when you start your business, what's your biggest expense going to be? When you're looking for cash flow to grow that business, what's going to be your biggest expense? See what we have in the chat. And remember, we learned from Dawn and Kathy that our biggest expense is going to be our employees. That's going to be our biggest investment. I like to call it an investment because we're investing in our employees. And the areas where we can cut costs, what are some of those areas? And we actually kind of talked about that when we reviewed our budgeting during a crisis. What are some of those areas where we can cut costs? Now, unfortunately, during the pandemic, we saw that a lot of employers, the areas where they cut costs was their employees. Whereas we could, think not about the employees, but maybe cutting some overhead expenses, like reducing some of the subscriptions that businesses may have that they may not be utilizing. So there are a lot of services that businesses use that they may be able to cut back on and preserve those expenses for their employee salaries. Okay. And Dawn also talked about ways to optimize accounts payable and accounts receivable processes. A lot of those ways to optimize is definitely using a third-party service, or to make certain that you have tools set up in place to make certain that you are making sure that your accounts payable are taken care of and your accounts receivable are in order, especially for tax reporting time. Next slide. From Dawn, we also learned how to increase our sales and streamline our cash flow with the right technology. How do we currently accept payments? And it's pretty much over the counter, in person, on the go, or mobile, or online. So I want to kind of take a step right now. I want to take a step back because I've given out a lot of information. So I would like for you in the chat, if you will, type in what is a hobby that you have that you think you can turn into a business. Let's just take a moment for that. Writing. Very good. So we have someone who says she likes to write. That's exceptional. Do we have anyone else? Baking. And now let me just go back for writing. Hattie, if you'll come off mute and tell us a little bit about your hobby of writing.
Well, actually, it's not so much a hobby as as a lawyer, I write a lot anyway, and
Okay.
I'm a pretty good writer. So I've, been thinking about how perhaps I could use that in other ways while we're all doing these virtual things.
Thank you so
So
much
I'm
for
not really
sharing.
sure, I haven't really thought it through, but, I've done some ghost writing for other lawyers, you know, um, writing articles for journals and that sort of thing is what I was thinking about.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think that is, those are fantastic ideas. Someone says, Hattie, you could also be an editor. That's fantastic. Thank you
That's
so
true.
much for sharing.
I edit everything for my family.
Okay. Very good. So see, there you have it. I mean, you're sitting right there and you have this awesome talent that you can turn into a business. That is phenomenal. And that is what this webinar review session is about, is helping our participants just think outside the box. Think of all the possibilities. Think of all the things that you could be doing with all of your great talent. Thank you so much for that. And I saw that Helen put baking. Helen, would you share with us a little bit about your talent?
Yes, I just love baking. I've been baking. I used to bake a lot with my mom, and I realized this is something that I really enjoy. Um, so I may branch off and start selling what I bake. But yes, I just love baking.
Well, thank you so much for that, Helen. If you need a taste tester, just let me know. Great talent there. Thank you so much. Let's go to next slide. Okay, and we just talked about some types of businesses that you all could create based on your talent during our webinar. We asked our participants what types of business they were, and we had a plethora of responses, and these are some of the responses that Dawn and Kathy provided for us during the webinar. Next slide. So eventually, most businesses do need to borrow money. So what are some examples of how business loans can be helpful? What are some of the reasons businesses need a loan? If you will, just type it in the chat. For startup, excellent. You can definitely use money to start your business. What about for equipment? So some of the reasons that businesses would need to borrow money would be for startup. It would be for equipment. It could be just for cash flow, to make certain that they have enough cash on hand in the case of emergency. Next slide. Okay, now this is one of the matching games that Dawn and Kathy utilized during our webinar series. So if we will, let's just take a moment to see who can get the answers to these questions, who can match up the best. And as I mentioned, Helen says she has prizes. We like Helen. Helen has prizes.
I do.
So for the first one, secured against your assets as collateral, giving some security to the lender. Secured. All right, Elma's on top of it. All right. Supported by your creditworthiness and obtained without the use of collateral. That's going to be unsecured. Pay it off at fixed intervals over a set period of time. Your revolving lines of credit reduces risks for lenders. And I'm kind of speeding up a little bit because I'm looking at my clock here. Reduces risk for lenders, making it easier for business owners to get a loan if they don't qualify for traditional financing. Okay. What do we have in the chat? Alma says SBA. And then the next one helps finance the cost of equipment by spreading out the cost. And that's your equipment loans. One-time lump sum extension of credit paid through periodic consistent installments. Okay. System keeps going, and that's your revolving. And then a flexible option where a set borrowing limit is extended to a consumer and funds can be borrowed again later after the money is repaid. And that's your revolving. Next question. Next screen. Okay. Our next slide. Okay. We also went through some true or false for our insurance. Let's see if we can get these in our chat. Is it true or false? Every minor mishap can lead to large lawsuits. Even a minor mishap can lead to large lawsuits. Is that true or false? I see true in the chat, and that is true. If your business has employees, you should have workers' compensation insurance. Is that true or false? That is absolutely true. If you rent your space, you don't need commercial property insurance. Is that true or false? And that is false, because you always want to protect yourself. If you're a young and able-bodied, you don't need to worry about having life or disability insurance. Is that true or false? That is false. Thank you so much for your participation. That is false. Next slide. Dawn and Kathy also reviewed with us, or they provided information with us about the examples of how insurance can protect you, your business, and your employees. They shared with us the importance of general liability insurance and how that can protect your business from legal lawsuits. They also shared with us information about commercial property insurance that can help protect your property from any loss due to any peril like fire, lightning, theft, hurricanes. Life and disability insurance can definitely help with making certain that your business continues long after your life and long after you're disabled. Workers' compensation insurance helps cover you in the event that one of your employees is injured on the job. You want to make certain that you have that insurance to cover them so that it does not come back on you as a liability lawsuit. And then there are several other types of insurance that you want to include. For instance, if you have special equipment that you want to cover, that's also available. Next slide. We want to thank you so much for taking your time this evening to go back through a review of all of the webinars that we have provided to you for the Discovering the Treasures of Homeownership webinar series. This first set of series was Smart Money Moves, where we really wanted to make certain that we can budget during a crisis, as well as take control of our credit and look deep down inside of ourselves to find those treasures inside of us where we can create our own and start our own businesses. Thank you so much. Our next slide will share with us our next webinar series and when it's going to start. Do we have that slide? Okay, we don't have that slide with us, but our next webinar series is first time home buyers. We are so excited about it. And we are expecting you to join us then, because we are going to walk through the homeownership process and mortgage lending on March 18th of 2020 at 7 p.m. And in addition to that, we're going to talk with a realtor who's going to share with us information about finding the right home, finding the right realtor. And last but not least, we're going to talk about leaving a legacy with wills, trusts, and estates. And as Helen mentioned earlier this evening, we have paired up with professionals throughout our area to provide this information to you, and we're really excited about it. I hope that this has been beneficial for you, but we really want to know where you are in terms of the information we have provided you, and we wanted to also see if there's any assistance that we can provide as well. Please stay tuned to your email for further information, as well as a survey for this particular webinar. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and we're also looking forward to working with you. We'd like to work with you individually and as groups to make certain that you are getting what you need in order to become that first-time home buyer, or to refinance your home, or to start that business, or to help you take control of your credit, or to help you leave a legacy and create a will or a trust. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.